This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine becomes Queen Consort. In recognition of her own loyal public service, I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely.
British royal history has never been kind to those who attempt to climb the throne through backroom maneuvers. But as the breathing of King Charles III grows shallower by the day, a chilling question echoes through the stone corridors of Sandringham. Is the ultimate price of a king's personal devotion the very collapse of the monarchy itself? We are witnessing a moment of unprecedented fragility, a leaked medical reality that suggests the crown is currently resting on a foundation of sand. It is July 2026. The air at Sandringham House is heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs and the oppressive silence of a looming transition. Leaked reports from the King's medical team have sent shockwaves through the Commonwealth, revealing that the monarch's cancer treatment has reached a critical impasse. His physical constitution is described as being at 80% exhaustion. The public, while maintaining a deep affection for the man, is beginning to voice a sharp, bitter frustration. They see a king clinging to the symbols of power, while a vacuum of leadership allows a dangerous shadow to grow, the shadow of a woman whose presence has long divided a nation. Before we go deeper into the secret document that changed everything this week, please take a moment to support the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe to Palace Tea Tonight, and comment below with the word duty to show your support for the stability of the crown. Your engagement helps us keep the lights on in this palace of truths. For years, Charles has been accused of prioritizing his heart over his heritage. But as his biological clock ticks louder, the king has finally faced a devastating awakening. Inside the private study at Sandringham, away from the prying eyes of the Clarence House staff, the monarch sat in a high-backed chair, his hands trembling as he stared at the portraits of his ancestors. He realized, perhaps too late, that his indulgence of Camilla's ambitions has pushed the House of Windsor to the edge of an abyss. Witnesses say the atmosphere was one of profound regret. The king was heard whispering to a close aide that his greatest fear was no longer death itself, but being remembered as the culpable one, the sovereign who allowed the crown to be tarnished by the very scandals he spent a lifetime trying to outrun. He saw the plummeting approval ratings and the rising tide of Republican sentiment, and he knew the source of the rot. At exactly 3:15 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, King Charles summoned Princess Anne to his side. There were no cameras, no press secretaries, and most importantly, no queen consort present. The king's voice, though weak, carried a new, flinty resolve. He reportedly looked his sister in the eye and admitted that he had been blind. He confessed that his desire for a peaceful home had led to a chaotic kingdom. He then produced a document, the Sandringham Secret Order. As he handed the folder to Anne, he told her that she was the only one he could trust to ensure the bloodline remained untainted. He instructed her that if his strength failed before the autumn, this order was to bypass the traditional channels of the Queen's office entirely. He was heard saying, "Anne, the future must belong to those the people can trust. I have allowed the past to linger too long." This wasn't just an administrative change. It was a father's desperate attempt to protect his son's inheritance from a wife who had grown too comfortable with the levers of power. The king's internal battle has ended, but for the rest of the palace, the war is just beginning. As the sun sets over the Norfolk coast, the secret order is now in the hands of the Princess Royal, and the clock is ticking for everyone in the line of succession. What happens when the Queen finds out her husband has signed away her influence in the middle of the night? The answers are hidden within the next few hours of this unfolding crisis. In the gilded halls of Windsor, power is not merely inherited. It is governed by a steel, cold framework established nearly a century ago. On July 29th, 2026, at exactly 4:15 p.m., that framework was activated like a silent trap. While the world watched news reports of the king's declining health, a secret meeting was convened in the Oak Room. The weapon of choice was not a sword, but a document, the Regency Act of 1937. This act is the monarchy's ultimate failsafe. It dictates that if the sovereign is no longer capable of performing their royal functions, a council of regency must be established to ensure the continuity of the state. For months, it was whispered that the queen consort believed this would be her moment of ultimate triumph. She assumed that as the king's closest confidante and wife, she would sit at the head of this council, wielding the scepter in his name. She had spent over 20 years navigating the treacherous waters of public opinion and palace intrigue to reach this very summit. However, the British Constitution is famously unforgiving to those it deems outsiders. As the Privy Council gathered, led by the unflinching Princess Anne, a legal document was placed on the table that effectively dismantled 20 years of ambition in 5 minutes. The document clarified a brutal reality. The Regency Act of 1937 does not grant power to a spouse if a direct adult heir is available. Princess Anne, acting as the king's chosen messenger, delivered the news with clinical precision. She reportedly told the room that the stability of the United Kingdom required a prince regent, not a placeholder. With a single signature, Prince William was designated as the Prince Regent, granted 100% of the Crown's strategic and executive authority. The detail of this maneuver was nothing short of savage. By granting William 100% control, the Privy Council effectively turned the Queen Consort into a ghost within her own palace. She was not to be a regent. She was not even to be a primary advisor. She was relegated to the status of a private companion to a fading monarch, stripped of any right to sign state papers or direct royal policy. The reaction behind closed doors was one of absolute, bone-chilling shock. Palace insiders describe a scene where the Queen Consort stood frozen, the color draining from her face as she realized that the steel wall of British law had no cracks for her to exploit. She had endured 2 decades of being called the other woman. She had meticulously rebuilt her image, and she had waited for the moment she could finally hold the reins. Now, she was discovering that her title was an empty shell, a hollow honor that carried no weight against the bloodline. She was heard whispering in a trembling voice to a senior aide, asking how 20 years of loyalty could be discarded so easily. She realized that in the eyes of the British state, she was still the interloper, the figure who could be sidelined the moment the institution's survival was at stake. The realization was a physical blow. She had traded her life for a crown that she would never truly wear. But as Prince William prepares to take the oath of regency, a new tension is rising. If the Queen Consort has been stripped of her legal power, what will she do with the secrets she has gathered over the last 2 decades? A cornered figure with nothing left to lose is often the most dangerous person in the palace. As the sun sets on the king's authority, a new and much darker battle is beginning to brew in the shadows of the Regency. The Oak Room at Windsor Castle has stood for centuries as a silent witness to the most brutal power shifts in British history, but none have been as cold or as final as the one that unfolded on the night of July 15, 2026. Outside, a violent summer thunderstorm lashed against the leaded glass windows, the thunder echoing the growing tension within. Inside, there were no cameras, no courtiers, and no secretaries. 4 people stood alone in the dimly lit room: Princess Anne, Prince William, Catherine, and the Queen Consort. The air was heavy, almost radioactive, with unspoken animosity. Princess Anne, acting with the ironclad authority of the king's designated executor, placed a sealed red briefcase on the heavy oak table. With a clinical click, she opened it and pulled out a document that would serve as King Charles's final political will, a roadmap for a reign that was effectively being handed over while the king was still breathing. As Anne began to read the terms in her famously sharp, unsentimental voice, the room seemed to shrink. The most lethal clause was saved for last. Anne looked directly at Camilla and read the words that shattered 2 decades of carefully cultivated status. The order stated that from this moment forward, every single aspect of the Queen Consort's life, her official schedule, her public appearances, her travel, and even her access to the sovereign's private funds, must be submitted for prior written approval by the Prince and Princess of Wales. For a moment, there was a silence, so absolute you could hear the rain hitting the stone walls. Then, the explosion happened. Palace insiders described the reaction as the heart-wrenching scream of a predator who had just felt the steel jaws of a trap snap shut. Camilla did not just object, she erupted. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped violently against the floor, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and unbridled fury. She reportedly lunged toward the door, demanding to see Charles immediately, shouting that she was the queen and she would not be treated like a prisoner in her own home. She accused the 3 of them of staging a coup while the king was too weak to defend her. But as she moved, Princess Anne stepped firmly into her path, her expression as unmoving as the castle walls. Anne's response was recorded as one of the most savage rebuttals in the history of the House of Windsor. She didn't raise her voice, but it cut through the room like a blade. She told Camilla that Charles was finally resting, and for the first time in his life, his mind was clear. She said, "He has handed the crown to the future, Camilla, because he knows the institution cannot survive if it stays chained to a past as stained as yours." The humiliation was total. Camilla turned to look at William, hoping perhaps for some shred of the diplomacy he had shown for years. Instead, she found a man whose jaw was set in granite, his eyes filled with a cold, piercing contempt that had been 20 years in the making. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was a reminder of every tear his mother had shed in 1996. Beside him sat Catherine. She remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, radiating a silent, terrifyingly calm authority. She didn't need to shout or argue. Her silence was the ultimate statement of power. She was no longer the apprentice. She was the new law. In that moment, Camilla realized that her reign had ended not with a flourish, but with a whimper in a locked room. As the lightning illuminated the oak room, the queen consort stood broken, realizing that the very people she had spent years trying to sideline were now her masters. But as the meeting broke up, one question hung in the air. What happens when a woman who has survived decades of public hatred is pushed into a corner with nothing left to lose? The storm outside was fading, but the real tempest within the palace walls was only just beginning to gather strength. On August 4th, 2026, the silent machinery of the royal treasury turned its gears against the queen consort in a move that can only be described as a clinical, financial execution. There were no public proclamations or dramatic speeches. Instead, the blow was delivered through a series of internal memos and budget spreadsheets. This was the moment the Prince Regent's power starvation strategy began to take hold, effectively strangling the influence of the queen consort before she could even formulate a counter-move. The numbers revealed in this internal audit are staggering. The budget for the Queen's private office, which is drawn from the sovereign grant, was slashed by exactly 60%. This was not a general cost-cutting measure for the entire monarchy. It was a targeted strike. Within 24 hours, 60% of her staff, including her senior press strategists, her private secretaries, and her specialized security detail, received notification that their positions were being eliminated. Prince William did not need to use force or legal threats to isolate his stepmother. He simply cut the supply lines that allowed her to project power within the palace walls. Palace insiders have recounted a chilling exchange that took place in the Treasury office on that Tuesday morning. A senior official from the Queen's staff reportedly arrived to protest the sudden freeze on her operational funds. He was met by one of William's closest financial advisors, who sat behind a desk piled with files. When the Queen's representative asked how she was expected to maintain her public standing and her charitable patronages with a 60% deficit, the advisor's response was ice cold. He reportedly stated that the era of the unlimited consort was over. He made it clear that her standing was now a personal luxury, not a state necessity, and that every penny of the remaining 40% would require a written justification submitted directly to the office of the Prince of Wales. The humiliation deepened when the details of the Dowager Queen allowance were leaked from a secret appendix to the King's will. The document explicitly dictates that the moment King Charles III takes his final breath, his wife's residency at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace must end immediately. There will be no transition period and no grace and favor residence within the primary royal estates. She is to be effectively evicted and moved to Clarence House, or more likely, her private villa at Ray Mill House. The woman who once maneuvered her way to the very heart of the British state is being told, in no uncertain terms, that she is a temporary guest whose time is up. This is the savage reality of the new regime. William is playing a long game, ensuring that when the inevitable transition happens, there will be no rival power center to challenge Catherine's position as the sole queen. By reducing the queen consort to a figure who must essentially beg for an allowance from her stepson, the Prince of Wales is settling a decades-old score. He is turning the most powerful woman in the kingdom into a royal widow with a restricted bank account. A former staffer who recently left the palace described the atmosphere at Clarence House as one of suffocating isolation. The queen consort, once surrounded by a bustling team of loyalists, now walks through rooms that are increasingly empty. The power starvation is working. She is finding that without the 60% of her budget, she has no voice in the press, no influence in the government, and no protection from the cold reality of her future. But as she sits in the darkening rooms of her private estate, one has to wonder. A woman who has survived this much won't go quietly into the night. What is she willing to trade to keep her head above the rising tide of the prince's vengeance? The gates of Ray Mill House may soon become the final fortress in a war that is far from over. The court of public opinion has delivered its final verdict, and the numbers are nothing short of a massacre. By mid-August 2026, the divide between the future of the monarchy and its current, controversial figurehead has become a chasm that no amount of palace public relations can bridge. While the Queen Consort's approval ratings have plummeted to a historic low of 22%, the Princess of Wales has emerged from her recent health battles with a record-shattering 85% approval rating. It is the highest score for any royal in the history of modern polling, and it has become the ultimate weapon in Prince William's arsenal. This 85% mandate has triggered a total restructuring of the royal hierarchy. On August 12, 2026, at precisely 9:00 a.m., a directive was sent from the Regency Council to all major British institutions. The order was simple: the transfer of influence. Over 300 of the nation's most prestigious patronages spanning the arts, global health, and high-level diplomacy were officially removed from the Queen Consort's portfolio and placed under the direct control of Catherine. The Princess of Wales has effectively become the gatekeeper of the royal image. No major media strategy, no film project, and no international tour can proceed without her personal sign-off. Behind the scenes, the shift was brutal. A senior communications officer was heard recounting a tense briefing where a staff member from the Queen's office tried to argue for a prominent role in an upcoming autumn gala. The response from the Regency team was swift and clinical. They reportedly said that the data is undeniable. The public is not asking for a Queen Consort who reminds them of past scandals. They are demanding the princess who represents their resilience. They made it clear that putting Camilla in the spotlight was no longer just a risk, it was a liability. The most savage aspect of this transition is that Catherine has not had to say a single word or take a single aggressive action. Her strategy is one of pure, radiant presence. On August 24th, during a high-profile event at the National Portrait Gallery, Catherine appeared alongside Prince George. The imagery was a masterclass in soft power. As she stood there, graceful and stoic, with the future king by her side, the contrast with the isolated, struggling Queen Consort was devastating. One veteran royal photographer described the scene as a living death sentence for Camilla's public life. He noted that the British public is hungry for the dignity and sanctity that Catherine provides. They want a queen who looks like a promise of the future, not a remnant of a complicated past. Every time Catherine appears with her children, she reinforces the message that the line of succession is secure, and that the intervening years of Camilla's influence were merely a detour that is now coming to an end. Inside the palace, Catherine's office has become the most powerful room in the building. While the Queen Consort sits in the quiet halls of Clarence House, waiting for news from the medical team at Sandringham, Catherine is already functioning as the Queen in all but name. She is the one the Prime Minister wants to be seen with. She is the one the global charities are begging to represent them. The 85% mandate has rendered Camilla's title irrelevant. In the eyes of the people, the crown has already moved on. But as the gap between 22% and 85% continues to grow, a new question arises. How will a woman who has survived decades of vilification react now that she is being systematically erased by the most loved woman in the world? The silent war is nearing its climax, and the most dangerous move may be the one no one sees coming. As the clock in the Sovereign's Tower struck midnight on August 31st, 2026, the 29th anniversary of a tragedy that changed the world, the final chapter of a 30-year war was quietly closed behind the heavy doors of Sandringham. The secret orders signed by King Charles III are no longer just administrative documents. They are now being recognized by palace insiders as a profound, silent apology to his first wife, the late Diana, Princess of Wales. In the twilight of his life, the king has realized that to save the crown, he must finally settle the debts of the past. The future under King William V is no longer a distant possibility. It is an active, functioning reality. The Prince Regent has not only taken control of the state's finances, but has begun the systematic dismantling of the Clarence House era. Historians will look back at this moment as the ultimate surrender of the man who would be king to the demands of history. By empowering William and Catherine with absolute authority, Charles has ensured that the monarchy returns to the hands of those who carry Diana's blood and her enduring legacy. A senior courtier, who has served the family for over 4 decades, whispered a devastating observation during a private briefing last week. He recounted a moment where the king, looking at a portrait of his sons, admitted that his greatest mistake was believing he could force the nation to forget. The king reportedly told William that the crown is a heavy burden, but it is lighter when carried by those the people truly love. This was the moment the king accepted that his reign was merely a bridge, a short, turbulent passage to the era of his son. The irony of this power shift is as sharp as a blade. In 2005, when Camilla stood at the altar in Windsor, she believed she had achieved the impossible. She had moved from the shadows to the light, from the other woman to the queen consort. She believed she had won the long game against the memory of Diana. But as we reach the autumn of 2026, the reality is a bitter pill. She has realized that she did not win. She was merely allowed to stay until the true heirs were ready. She has lost everything, not to a hostile public or a vengeful press, but to the hands of Diana's children. William's move to cut 60% of her budget and Catherine's 85% approval rating have acted as a twin engine of displacement. Camilla is finding that while she holds the title, the Princess of Wales holds the kingdom. The Queen Consort's short reign is reaching its conclusion even while the King is still present. The most terrifying punishment the British monarchy can inflict is not execution or exile. It is oblivion. As the curtains begin to close on this era, Camilla faces the one thing she feared most, being erased from the official narrative. In the history books of the future, she will be a footnote, a temporary consort in a transitional reign. The names that will resonate through the centuries are Charles, William, and Catherine. The usurper's final dance is ending in the silence of Ray Mill House. The power has shifted, the debt to Diana has been paid in the currency of influence, and the new era has begun. The king has chosen his legacy, and it is one that belongs to his grandchildren, not his wife. If you found this deep dive into the palace's final power play fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Palace Tea Tonight. Your support allows us to continue uncovering the truths that the mainstream media ignores. What do you think of King Charles's final apology? Is this the justice Diana deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below with the word legacy. Thank you for watching Palace Tea Tonight, where the truth is always served.